Welcome back to Shannons Club TV, the show for all motoring fans to revisit memorable cars with a motorsport pedigree in Australia. We're enjoying your comments with each new episode, so please join the conversation with other members on the Shannons Club website.
Coming up, we'll be taking a road trip with an owner of our feature car and get the latest market news from the Shannons auctions team. So let's get rolling with the hot hatch from Japan that proved good things really do come in small packages, the Suzuki Swift GTI.
The Suzuki Swift GTI was to the 1980s what the Subaru Impreza WRX would become to the 1990s. No one expected it. No other car could match its performance for money equation, and this latter-day Mini Cooper S quickly assumed cult status. The GTI's magnificent 1.3 litre 16-valve twin-cam engine made 74 kilowatts, and each one had to haul just 10 kilograms. The standing 400 metres took 16.6 seconds, and the Suzuki had the measure of all prospective rivals, plenty of which cost much more than its $19,990, and the price was soon down to $15,990. This may seem harsh, but essentially the Suzuki Swift GTI was the perfect example of a superb engine spoiled by the car. There were remarkably few changes to the standard three-door Swift, which was also sold by Holden as a five-door Barina. But the GTI did receive stiffer springs and its own dampers. The front disc brakes scored ventilated rotors, and there was a larger master cylinder and booster. But the remainder of the car, trim and equipment aside, was still pretty much bargain basement specification. Mark, was anyone surprised when the Swift GTI quickly became the favoured Group E race car?
Oh, probably not, given how quickly word on the street spread about what a brilliant little pocket rocket this Swift GTI was. But it was the second version, the SF, that really carved out a name for itself in Group E production car racing, particularly endurance racing, which I'll get to a bit later on.
Central locking and electric mirrors were included, but you had to wind the windows. The upholstery was of a quite appealing cloth, and the front seats were good. There were plastic wheel caps on the 13-inch rims. Tyres were 165/65s. As a race car, the Swift GTI was somewhat limited by having a tiny 33-litre fuel tank, but on the road this was generally good for at least 450 kilometres. The Suzi's superb performance was partly due to very low overall gearing. At 100 kilometres an hour, the 1.3 litre engine was closing on 4,000 RPM. A completely restyled body for the Swift Barina arrived in 1989. Unfortunately for GTI fans, improvements were mainly limited to rear disc brakes and 5 extra Newton metres of torque, while weight was up by 40 kilos. Performance was slightly less effervescent. So the 1989 GTI was perhaps a backward step. No matter, I'd be delighted to have either model in my shed. Mark, which of the two Swift GTI models was more popular with racers?
Well, I think you'd have to say the second, the SF model, particularly when you look at its incredible performances in the James Hardy 12-hour at Bathurst. The second generation, or SF, Suzuki Swift GTI enjoyed greater competition success than its SA predecessor, as it was a prolific winner in Group E production car racing for almost a decade. It was in the annual James Hardy 12-hour production car endurance race at Bathurst where young gun Mark Brame and his GTI enjoyed their greatest success, claiming a perfect score of 4 wins from 4 starts in Class A for the smallest cars in the race, with a capacity limit under 1600 cc's. The first came in 1991. After outclassing faster but less frugal Toyota Corollas, Brame not only won Class A with co-drivers Jeff Forshaw and Henry Draper, but also finished an excellent 10th outright. The 1.6 litre Corollas again proved faster in 1992, But the smaller 1.3 litre GTI's benchmark reliability and economy over 12 gruelling hours proved decisive in another Suzuki victory. Brame made it 3 from 3 in 1993, when Class A was entirely Swifts and Corollas. The Toyotas again set the early pace, but the Swift GTI's endurance racing strengths again proved unbeatable, just as they did again in 1994, even after race organisers increased the class engine limit to 1.8 litres in the vain hope of enticing new challengers to break the Suzuki stranglehold. John, the local Suzuki importer Atiko also backed a one-make series for these cars in 1995. Only won for one year, but gee, it really showed their sporting prowess, didn't it?
Yes, I think it did. Certainly very interesting door handle to door handle racing.
Yeah, and cheap too.
Cheap,
yeah. So it got a lot of runners. I do remember though, a proof of how strong these little cars were. That horrific crash at Bathurst. Remember Glenn Mason rolled coming into the chase? Rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled. Amazingly, he got out of that relatively unscathed, but that was a stock-bodied car, just with a bolt-in cage.
Yeah.
So that showed how incredibly strong these cars were too, which I think impressed a lot of people.
Certainly.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. Brame also easily won the under 1600cc division in the Australian Production Car Championship in 1994 and claimed yet another class win and the GTI's highest outright placing of 8th in the 5th and final 12-hour the following year after its move from Bathurst to Sydney's Eastern Creek. Brame's departure from the small car class opened the door to a new Suzuki king, Andrei Pavicevic, who won the 1995 APCC and 1996 Pro Car titles, followed by Nigel Stones, who claimed the Swift GTI's final Pro Car crown in 1998, almost a decade after its launch. The Swift GTI will be remembered as a giant killer, particularly at Mount Panorama, with its notoriously steep climbs and long straights, which have traditionally made life hard for small cars. Clearly, this Suzuki was a lot more than just a small car. Remember to join the Shannons Club, where you can connect with other enthusiasts around the country.
My name's Martin. I'm here with my 1995 Suzuki Swift GTI and my 2016 Suzuki Swift at Mount Panorama, Bathurst. I've owned this car since 2011. The car was pretty much like you see it today when I bought it. The GTI was the bit more performance version of the Swifts in the 90s. It had a bit better suspension and brakes. It's got a little twin cam 16 valve motor. The motor is unreal. They drive really well. This car's pretty raw to drive compared to a lot of new cars. It's got the power and the handling what new cars have, but there's no ABS brakes, there's no power steering, it's just you in the car driving. That makes it a lot more fun. Back in the 90s they had the GTI 1 Series Make Cup and they did race them at the Bathurst 1000 as well in their own class where they did pretty well. It handles pretty good. They still can outrun a lot of new cars. I've been with Shannons with this car now for a bit over 3 years and it's been a good experience so far. I have owned 11 Suzukis now. I bought my first one back in 1996 and I just sort of liked them and kept going with Suzukis. My future plans for this car are just to keep it the way it is because most of them have been modified a lot and they're getting harder and harder to find in this condition.
Shannons National Auctions Manager Chris Borobon is here with all the latest market news on the Suzuki Swift GTI. Welcome, Christoph.
Welcome, mate. When we talk about Suzuki Swifts, are we talking about a modern-day Cooper S? Some people have referred to it as that. Would that be fair?
They were very popular when they came out, weren't they? I mean, it was the hot little hatch that, I think the young kids had to have. So it really had its day. Yeah.
But more advanced, obviously. 5-speed gearbox, beautiful little twin cam engine. That was just
the 1.3 was great.
A jewel of an engine.
So what's happened to them? I imagine a lot of them were driven pretty hard, predominantly by young people. What's your chances of finding an original SA or the second SF model today?
I think very difficult today. I think most of them that we saw back in the 90s were modified. As you said, bigger wheels, done some engine work.
There was that the fast fours and rotary scene. I remember that late 90s scene. They were everywhere. And the modifications that were just incredible.
Well, I was the founding editor of that magazine, and I can remember that the Swift GTI was just such fantastic headline cover type news for the hot hatch. The hot four-cylinder market. It was an extraordinary little car.
So it did perform well. I mean, we don't see too many today, and I mean, definitely for the auction house, we never see any come through. In the classifieds, I can't say I've really seen any as well. But look, maybe for the JDM scene, there are, probably some people starting to look at them again now. Because I think it's the people that were, into them back in the 90s again. We sort of remember
bit of
those
nostalgia?
cars. That's right, a bit of nostalgia.
Okay.
You don't seem to see them around the club racing scene very much. I can't remember seeing any at Lakeside.
Yeah, not really these days. You don't. And is that because we've seen progression in what has come out as hot hatches, and now we've got a lot of turbo cars producing a lot more horsepower. So has that maybe been the demise of the Suzuki?
I think that's probably right.
I think one of the problems is too, we spoke about that scene back in the late 90s where so many of these cars were being modified and heavily modified. So there's a good chance that they just, after they'd finished their careers at car shows and stuff, we never saw them again. So there's probably not a lot on the ground now. Would that be fair to say?
That's fair to say, absolutely. So I think survival rates are quite low. But look, if you can find an original car or something that was tastefully modified back in the day, it'd be a good thing to have.
So there was the first generation, the SA, and the SF, the second. Is there any difference in desirability between those, or are you just looking for, if you can get either one with a really good ownership history and stuff, just grab it?
I think so. I think it's either one. I think some people might have preference for the SF and others, maybe the SA because it was the first, but I think it's just finding a really good example.
And do you think it's a potentially appreciating classic or not? It's too hard to tell.
It's hard to tell, but I think it's probably a good entry level classic.
Entry level, I think so. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks,
Christoph. And remember, you can keep up to date with all the latest auctions news on the Shannons Club website. If you'd like your own competition image of the Suzuki Swift GTI, visit AutoPic's huge motorsport photo archive.
Yeah, on reflection, it's you look at the Swift when it was brought out, and you look at the whole history of the Japanese car industry from the end of World War II. They were very, very successful at creating cars to fill niches and fill them very well. And I think the Swift GTI is another example of that, isn't it? Really?
No one was asking for a 1.3 litre.
Little hot hatch.
Fantastic little hot hatch. That's right. They had by then done almost everything, and the luxury cars came later. But it was also beautifully executed for what it was.
Yeah, and the engineering, just incredible.
Incredible engineering.
Earlier we mentioned the big crash at Bathurst, which showed the phenomenal strength of the body shop. But that engine was just such a jewel of an engine.
The engine was just magnificent.
It was.
And a lot of the rest of the car, frankly, was pretty ordinary. I mean, imagine if that engine had gone into a really brilliant handling car, with great exterior design. You can't say that the Swift was that, but the engine was so good. The drivetrain, I think you could say, was so good it made up for it.
And you would have to say, any misgivings in terms of handling or whatever, the car's motorsport career locally was so good that it really stands on its own, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah, outstanding thing.
Yeah. We hope you've enjoyed reflecting on the astonishing Suzuki Swift GTI, and we'll catch you next time on Shannons Club TV. Bye for now.